Modern aggressive hardtails are some of the most fun bikes money can buy. And that's why some people won't hesitate to spend just about as much as a used car on one of these bikes. But for many riders, the most attractive thing about these hardtails is their relatively low cost. And those are the riders I'm talking to today. In today's video, we've got 5 bikes that all cost less than $2,000 and have the geometry and the part spec to put a spanking on some of your buddies on full suspension bikes that are gonna cost well more than twice as much. Since today's video is all about value, I'm gonna be putting special attention towards the part spec that comes on these bikes. Essentially, how much bike are you getting for your money? But you guys know me, I'm also gonna geek out on the geometry a little bit too and let you know which bike might be best suited for which type of rider. I'll be going through these 5 bikes in order from most expensive to least expensive, and at the end of the video, I'm gonna give you my top choice for the best aggressive hardtail for under $5,000. As you're watching this video, if you've got any questions on these bikes or maybe you've ridden them and you have some experience you want to share with other riders, please go ahead and leave that down in the comments. And while you're down there, it'd mean a ton if you go ahead and like this video and subscribe to our channel as well. So let's go ahead and jump in there with bike number 5, the most expensive bike on our list. It is the Marin San Quentin 3. The 2023 Marin San Quentin 3 is a bike that's very near and dear to my heart, mostly because it's hanging on that wall right there. That's right, I own one, and if you've watched this channel for very long, you've probably seen some videos with it. The $2,000 price tag that this bike is sold at not only gets you a super dialed frame with some really unique geometry I'll be talking about in just a little bit, but also a pretty dialed part spec. The bike comes with a 140mm Marzocchi Bomber Z2 fork, as well as a Shimano drivetrain that's kind of a mix of Dior and SLX components. It's also got some pretty rad Shimano 4-piston brakes and some super aggressive tubeless Maxxis Assegai tires. Most of the other components on this bike come in-house from Marin, and while they're nothing to write home about, I haven't had any issues with them on this bike, and I've been riding it now for about 3 months. One last thing to note, just like every bike on this list, the San Quentin does come with a dropper post, but something that's really cool is that it actually comes with a quite a bit longer travel dropper than you'll find on most complete bikes. The large and extra large frames come with a 200mm dropper post. And it's a good thing too, because like I said a second ago, the geometry on this frame is pretty dang unique. And the most unique thing about it is the ridiculously low seat tube. The size large has a seat tube length of just 375mm, which is comparable to a lot of brands small or medium. What this means is that for smaller riders with a shorter inseam who want to have a nice big long bike for, say, enduro racing, you can size up without needing to worry about getting snagged on your seat. It also means that riders who maybe come from a BMX freestyle background and are used to having their seat super low and kind of like that riding style can get that seat completely out of the way for all your little silly jibs and tricks that you want to do. The rest of the geometry on this bike is pretty aggressive as well. It's got a 64-degree head tube angle and a 77-degree seat tube angle. That puts the reach at 470mm for a size large, which isn't the biggest on this list, but it should be plenty roomy enough for, again, any kind of enduro racing or aggressive trail riding. Lastly, at the back of the San Quentin, we've got some pretty short 425mm chainstays and a bottom bracket drop of 50mm. This gives this bike a decent balance of having the agility of a shorter rear end, but the stability of a really low bottom bracket. The San Quentin is also the only bike on this list that comes with 27.5-inch wheels. I'm a big fan of smaller wheels. It makes the bike a little bit more maneuverable, a little more playful, and ride a little bit better in skate parks and dirt jumps. So if you're interested in that sort of a thing, San Quentin is probably the bike for you. Now, seeing as the San Quentin is actually the only bike on this list that I've spent a good amount of time riding, everything else I'm kind of just judging off of other riders' reviews as well as the part spec and geometry you can find online, I'm not gonna go super deep into my own riding experience on this bike. I've got plenty of other videos of that here on this channel. Instead, we're gonna go ahead and move on to bike number 4, which also comes in at $1999. That is the Canyon Stoic 4. The Canyon Stoic 4 is a super rad bike. If you ask me, it's one of the better looking bikes on this list. And just like all these bikes, it packs a ton of value into that $2,000 price tag. Starting at the front of the bike, it has a 140mm RockShox Pike Select. I'm a huge fan of the 35mm stanchion forks coming from RockShox, that being the Pike and the Lyric. I have the Lyric Select on my own RSD middle child, and so this Pike Select in my opinion, is probably one of the best forks on this list. SRAM is going to take care of the getting going and stopping going duties with the NX drivetrain and 4-piston guide T brakes. Wheels on the Stoic are kind of a mixed bag with some rims coming from Alex, the front hub being Shimano and the back hub being KT. I'm not exactly sure how those components are going to hold up, but again, I think Canyon spec'd this bike pretty dang well, so I don't think you have too much to worry about. As for tires, Canyon spec'd this bike out with Schwalbe rubber. We've got a Magic Mary up front and a Hans Dampf in the back. That should be a really good, kind of well-rounded tire. You've got a real aggressive tire up front and a bit of a faster rolling, kind of all-around tire in the back, which I think suits an aggressive hardtail pretty dang well. Outside of those components, just about every other part on this bike, including the dropper post, is going to come in-house from Canyon, so let's go ahead and move on to the geometry. Once again, starting at the front of the bike, the Stoic 4 has a 65-degree head tube angle, which I think is just about perfect for an aggressive hardtail. The seat tube is at a pretty average 75 degrees, and the chainstays are 428 millimeters long. So far, so good, but the thing that I'm not very stoked on about this bike is it's got a big old seat tube, size large, coming in at 460 millimeters. I've said on this channel many times before that there's no reason for a hardtail to run such a tall seat tube, and it really limits riders who want to size up their frame, or again, people like me who are kind of dependent on running their seat super low. Thankfully though, the rest of the geometry seems pretty sorted. It's got a bottom bracket drop of 60 millimeters, which is a bit on the higher side, which again, I tend to prefer. Makes the bike feel a little bit more playful, and it's got a reach of 480 millimeters in the size large. If you're looking for an all-around bike, a beautiful frame, and some pretty dang good components for the price, then I think this Canyon Stoic 4 is an awesome bike for you. The third bike on our list comes from a brand that's been making waves in the value bike industry for a while, and they actually just signed a rider that I'm a huge fan of, Kyle Straight. If you don't know what I'm talking about yet, it is a Vitus Sentier 29 VRS. The Sentier comes in 4 different build options, the VRS being the second to highest, and it's gonna set you back just $1,699. For that, you're gonna get a 140 millimeter Fox Rhythm fork and a Shimano Dior drivetrain. You're also gonna get some great Shimano 4-piston brakes on there as well. Vitus has spec'd this bike with some WTB I-30 rims and some in-house KT hubs. The Vitus actually has the exact same tires as the Canyon we just talked about, with that Schwalbe Magic Mary in the front and the Hans Dampf in the back. Of all the bikes on the list, this Vitus is probably the most conservative when it comes to geometry, but that's not exactly a bad thing. It's got a head tube angle of 66.5 degrees and a pretty dang slack seat tube angle of 73 degrees. That puts the reach at a shockingly small 446 millimeters on the size large. What's not short, however, is the seat tube on this bike, which is actually the longest of any on this list at 483 millimeters. Rounding things out at the back of the bike, the Vitus has some pretty long 439 millimeter chainstays and a bottom bracket drop of 62 millimeters. All in all, this Vitus does a great job of including some really nice parts in at that price point for less than $1,700. The geometry for me is just a bit too far on the XC side of the spectrum for it to be a bike I'd ever seriously consider owning, but if you are looking for an aggressive cross-country bike, then this $1,700 Vitus Sentier VRS is absolutely a great option for you. Moving on then to the second to cheapest bike on our list. This is the Rocky Mountain Growler 40, which usually is gonna set you back $1,799, but right now, if you wanna get a 2022 model, it is on sale for just $1,439. And that is honestly an absolute steal for all the value that Rocky Mountain has packed into this bike. For one, it's a really good looking frame, but I know we're not here just for the looks, so let's dive into the part spec. The Rocky Mountain Growler 40 does come with an SR Suntour fork. It's the SR Suntour LOR Air Boost 140. I don't know a ton about this fork, and I know a lot of people like to hate on SR Suntour, but it is an air fork, which means you are gonna be able to fine tune that PSI to best suit your riding. And again, for a bike under $1,500, I don't think you can complain too much. Another thing that you might want to complain just a little bit about are the brakes on this bike. They come from a brand called Clark's that I've never heard of. There's some 2-piston brakes with resin pads. Honestly, if you're gonna push this bike like I think Rocky Mountain probably intended this frame to be pushed, you're gonna need to replace the brakes at some point. What you're not gonna have any complaints about, however, is the drivetrain, because they have gone ahead and spec'd this bike with the great 12-speed Shimano Dior drivetrain, which I've ridden quite a bit on and never found any issues with. It's pretty dang dialed. The wheel situation on this bike looks pretty similar to that Vitus we just talked about. We've got those same WTB rims laced to some in-house Rocky Mountain hubs. The tires are also coming from WTB with a Vigilante in the front and a Trail Boss in the back. So let's go ahead and move on to the geometry. Just like the San Quentin we talked about earlier, the Rocky Mountain Growler has a 64-degree head tube angle. It's also got a 75-degree seat tube angle, which puts the reach at 475 millimeters. The seat tube is relatively average at 445 millimeters on the size large, and the chainstays are a bit on the longer end at 435 millimeters. The bottom bracket drop on this bike is just 55 millimeters, which on a 29-inch bike is not a ton of drop. That means that this bike is probably gonna feel a little bit more playful, even with those longer chainstays, and it also means it could be a really good contender to convert to a mullet should you wanna try that out. So if you're looking for a sweet frame with some dial geometry at a super low entry price of less than $1,500, then this Rocky Mountain Growler is the bike for you. Just keep in mind though that you might need to replace those brakes and maybe the fork down the road as well. The last bike on our list is, of course, the cheapest. It's just $1,344. And so that probably means that it's gonna have the worst spec of any bike on this list. No. Guys, this bike has the best spec of any bike on this list, and my mind is kind of blowing right now because I want to go buy this bike so bad, but I don't have $1,300 to spend right now. This is the On1 Hello Dave SRAM GX build. That's right, this thing has SRAM GX, and we'll talk more about the spec in just a little bit, but this bike, just like the Rocky Mountain, is on sale right now. It is 40% off. So guys, if you are looking to get an aggressive hardtail, just pause this video and go buy it right now. Spoiler alert, this is gonna win the prize. I'm sorry, I'm freaking out, I'm getting ahead of myself, but this is a really cool bike. So let's dive into the specs on this thing. As the name would suggest, you are gonna be getting a SRAM GX drivetrain. In my opinion, that's one of the best drivetrains out there right now. Wendy's got that on her Trek Slash, and I'm super jealous. You're also gonna get that same RockShox Pike Select fork that we saw in the Canyon Stoic with 150 millimeters of travel. SRAM is also covering the braking on this bike with the G2 4-piston brakes. Say what you will about the SRAM bite point, but I run them on my RST middle child and I don't have any issue with them. The bike rolls on some 29-inch WTB i30 rims laced to Formula hubs, and those are wrapped with Pan Racer Firesport 29-inch wheels. The one thing that I have to knock this bike for is that it actually comes with wire bead tires. I have no idea why they spec'd a GX bike with wire beads, but you are gonna need to get some different tires when you wanna convert to tubeless. And guys, if you thought the spec was crazy for the $1,300 price tag, then wait till you hear the geometry numbers on this bike because they are kind of out of this world. The head tube angle on the On1 Hello Dave is 62 degrees. That's like a full-on downhill bike. I actually featured this bike in my top 5 most aggressive hardtails you can buy, and yeah, it was on that list. Equally ridiculous are the chainstay lengths, which are 458 millimeters long. So between that super slack 62-degree head tube angle, those ridiculously long chainstays, and a pretty long reach of 480 millimeters on the size large, this bike has a wheelbase of 1,296 millimeters, and that 1,300 millimeters is way longer than any bike I've ever ridden. I'm sure it's a hoot down really steep, chunky, gnarly stuff, but I wouldn't want to take it around a switchback. I'm thankful to say that On1 has gone ahead and put a super short seat tube on this bike. The size large has a seat tube length of just 430 millimeters. It's also got a relatively high bottom bracket considering the 29-inch wheels, with a bottom bracket drop of just 50 millimeters. So if that 62-degree head tube angle is too steep for you, well, you could throw a 27.5-inch wheel on there and slacken that out another degree or so. The On1 Hello Dave is a super unique bike. It kind of has a cult following. Every rider I've ever talked to who's ridden one of these bikes absolutely loves it and says it's a ton of fun. I'm almost tempted to go ahead and just buy one right now, but again, I don't have the money for that. But if you do, then I would say you'd be crazy not to. The price tag on this bike right now is absurd. Well, if you've been watching this video all the way through, then you already know what my winner is for the best aggressive hardtail for under $2,000. But if you just skip to the end to see who the winner was, then I'm gonna go ahead and tell you, it is the On1 Hello Dave. Somehow the cheapest bike on our list has the best spec on our list, other than those weird wire bead tires, and it's got some super ridiculous geometry. Going back to my original notion at the start of this video that aggressive hardtails for many people are all about getting as much bike as you can for the money and being able to whoop up on your friends with much more expensive bikes, I can't think of a better bike to do that than this On1 Hello Dave. If you've got questions about that bike or any other, I'd be happy to answer those. Again, I only have personal experience on the Marin San Quentin 3, but I feel like I've ridden enough hardtails by now that I should be able to give you a good idea of what bike's gonna work best for you. If you found this video helpful, please go ahead and hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. That will just help other people find this video and be able to share some hardtail love with others. And after you've done that, go ahead and grab your hardtail or your full suspension bike, go for a ride, and hopefully I'll see you on the trail.